welcome to the Goober Support Tech Talk podcast. My name is Zach.
And I'm Matt.
Zach and Matt in the morning.
And,
Matt, though. So today we are going over the laptop buyer's guide. So a ton of just general recommendations on what to watch out for when purchasing a new laptop, what some of the specs mean, what some price points you might want to hit, and just some of those characteristics to keep an eye on to make sure that you get a good deal and the device is going to do what you need it to.
Yeah, so I think we're starting off with laptop size. We're going to be going over 17-inch, 15 slash 16-inch, gets called different things, and 13-inch, right?
Yeah, so basically, modern day, there's kind of three classes of laptop size. We have the 14-inch. Those are kind of on the smaller side. 15.6, that's pretty much the standard at this point. But you can still find a couple out there that are in the 17-inch class. Now, we're only talking like an 1.5 inch difference between all of these sizes going up the tier. What are some of the things you're going to lose on a 14-inch laptop, though?
You want to have a lower resolution just because you have less pixels in total. You might end up having larger text because of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a smaller laptop. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's kind of the opposite effect with the 17-inch laptop is it's so big. You'll end up having a lighter laptop with a 14-inch.
Yeah, so the size here, basically the gist of what we're saying is that it's kind of going to be up to your preference and what you're trying to do with it. 14-inch, going to be most likely a lot lighter, a lot more portable. 17-inch is going to be, a bulky, heavy anchor weighing you down. If you like that, though, some people really enjoy that and being able to have a full screen still, as if it was a desktop computer. They used to actually be called desktop replacement laptops long time ago. They've kind of dropped all those dumb, silly names because nothing actually lined up with that. But the other thing that you're going to lose, too, which is nice to keep in mind, 14-inch, you're going to have a hard time finding a numpad. 17-inch, you're almost going to only find numpad. Now, the 15.6-inch class, that's kind of a gray area.
Or the Goldilocks zone, too, for a lot of people.
Yeah. But I'd say it's about 50-50 on whether those have a numpad or not. So if that's something you're looking out for, if that's something you need for productivity or just for the ease of use, you're definitely going to be looking at that 15.6-inch class over the 14. There are a few exceptions to these rules. Check your descriptions when you go to purchase or when you're comparing devices there, because a couple things like Chromebooks, I've seen them down into a 13-inch class. Technically, at this point, you almost can count an iPad as a laptop, and those can go all the way down to 10-inch. So tons and tons of different sizes and scales, but when we're talking Windows-based laptops, those are the main three, and luckily, at this point, the parts are mostly the same from the small ones to the large ones. You might have just slightly more cooling issues with a smaller one, but they're going to also make sure the parts are a little
very
slower for that.
Very brand dependent as well.
Yeah, so it's mostly personal choice. So that's the good news with this one. Go with what you like. Go with what feels comfortable. Maybe go to a store and check out a couple, since these sizes have become more standard.
You'll also see side by side other laptops if you're right there in the store.
Yeah. Bonus points if you can actually pick it up and hold it for a second, because they are laptops. They're going to be on your lap at some point. So that's going to bring us into our next criteria, which is going to be processors. Now we start to get into some kind of tech specs here, talking nerdy to you. So There's two main brands of processors out there.
That would be Intel and AMD.
Yeah. Wasn't that long ago, AMD was kind of lagging behind, and they were kind of we'll put this nicely, they were an economy option. But since then, they've made massive strides. They've caught up and even surpassed Intel in some areas, and depending on workloads. And currently, they are almost even across the board. But both companies do have a kind of tier system that they follow for their processors. And luckily, they have a very similar naming convention, so it makes it very easy to explain now.
Directly compare them, like the i3, the i5s, the i7s.
Yeah, what's the AMD equivalent?
AMD Ryzen 3, the Ryzen 5, the Ryzen 7, and the Ryzen 9s.
So those are the four main classes. Intel does make another chip that they're just calling the Intel Core now. They used to be called Pentiums or Celrons. They've ended that program. We don't really recommend those for any like daily usage. Those are like almost for very, very light use cases, or something specific in mind. Like I know people that run home servers off of stuff like that because they're power efficient. If you have no idea what I just said right there, just stay away. You're buying a Ford Fiesta when you probably needed, a Ford Fusion or something. But the tiers, they start at i3 on the Intel side, Ryzen 3 on the AMD side. And those are normally going to be good enough for just a general home computer. Hey, I browse the internet from time to time. I don't really do anything too strenuous. Maybe I go on YouTube every now and then. And like that's the hardest thing I do on my computer. i3 or i5, or sorry, i3 is going to be fine for that. i5 is where we start to jump into that next tier where maybe it's good for somebody that's a home user that wants to do just a little bit more. Maybe some Word editing, Excel sheets, multiple browser tabs open at the same time. And it starts to become a good class for light workloads, like professional loads. So that's at the i5, and again, Ryzen 5 on the AMD side level. And then that takes us up to i7.
Yeah, and i7, you can actually start playing some more simple games on top of all of the professional workload. You can handle a lot more of that. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to get to many of the newer AAA games with crazy i7, or with the standard i7.
At least, right, without a separate graphics card, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, just the CPU, you're not going to be able to play those games. But they can handle the workload in a professional one in that sense. Word, you're going to crush. Excel, you're going to crush. You're going to, anything from Office or Libre too.
To bring my car analogy back into it, at i7 standards, you now have like a really solid, like an Audi or something. Like you're well over the average amount, and it's going to handle most of the things you throw at it. Which brings us all the way up to the big boy, which is the i9, and again, Ryzen 9 on the AMD side, which honestly is going to be just for enthusiasts, or you do crazy amounts of number crunching. I actually can't even wholeheartedly recommend an i9 on a laptop because they are so big and so powerful that they're also super power hungry and they're super hot. Both of which you have a problem with if you're using, a battery on your literal laptop. You're basically going to burn yourself. Yep. You're going to boil yourself alive there. So,
cook an egg.
And you're not going to have enough battery to like do anything. You won't even survive a flight, even a quick one, in some cases with something as powerful as an i9. Now, if you're always going to leave the laptop at your desk and it's always going to be plugged directly into the wall, and you do have that need for all of that processing power and that heavy workload, sure.
But even at that point, get a desktop.
You're probably going to be better off with a desktop. You'll actually be able to take full advantage of that i9 or Ryzen 9
The problems that
chip.
occur with an i9 or a Ryzen 9, like the overheating and the power demand, are kind of counteracted when you have a desktop full setup that is made to deal with it. You'll have a heat sink for it, you'll have airflow, and you'll have a power supply.
So I just want to run through that one more time from the top. i3, great for just a home user. Maybe you go on the computer for like an hour a day. i5 is when we start to get more into a little bit of serious territory. Hey, I'm a pretty heavy home user, or I want to do some actual work, some actual productivity on this. i7, I need to be able to do everything at work and maybe even a little bit more. And then i9, I want to overkill everything and just, not have to worry about ever running out of power ever. So that's kind of the rundown there. And then, of course, as we said, again, AMD equivalents for kind of all four of those tiers there.
Yeah, anytime we said i9 or I number, it applies for Ryzen with said number.
Yep. So that brings us into the next category, which is going to be memory. Now, memory is very important to look at on laptops because there are a lot of models that are getting so thin that they can't actually fit a memory socket on the computer for upgrades or expansion later. They're actually soldering the RAM, the memory, and the memory unit.
It'll just be a row of chips. Yep.
So one, keep an eye out for that and just at least know that you're not going to upgrade later if they're soldered to the board. And two, maybe try and not buy one that's like that so you can do those upgrades at a later date. But that's why it's important to get the amount of RAM right. Unfortunately, through our experience, it kind of seems like the industry standard of 8 gigabytes of RAM is just not enough for Windows 11. We've run into issues where people have crashing and blue screens and unresponsive computers, even just running a few open Chrome tabs and then like PowerPoint or something.
Yep.
Modern computers, the operating systems, everything like that, it eats up a lot of memory. Yeah. So we try to look for at least 12 gigs. That will handle some of those lighter workloads and those less demanding applications. Really, in a perfect world, you would have 16. Just leaves you a little bit of headroom, and as we continue to move forward and get more updates, you'll have a little bit more space and a little bit more room to grow there.
Yeah, I mean, considering you've got so many things you need to run, like a browser, your antivirus, if you have one, just those two with 8 gigabytes, you can't use anything else now.
It seems that way. Windows has gotten a lot better at kind of scaling to the amount of RAM that you have, but the way that it does it is it turns off a lot of features. So if you're starving the computer of RAM and it's constantly hitting that threshold where Windows has to go like literally over to the wall and flip a bunch of light switches on and then immediately flip them all back off and then over and over again, right? If you keep bouncing up against that threshold, you're going to end up having a bad experience because it takes processing power and consumption to actually go through and flip all those switches. So you're, in a weird way, you're almost compounding the issue here. So 12 is kind of a weird configuration. We don't see it that often in the wild, like on an actual sales sheet. So you're probably going to end up at the 16 gigabyte category when shopping for a new laptop. But sometimes on Amazon, you'll see some strange product listings. if that's where you're shopping. But going from 16 to the next step up, which is usually 32. Once again, 24 exists, but it's very rare. It's probably even more rare than 12.
I've actually never seen 24 gigabyte.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen like one or two, and they were probably custom upgraded too.
Yeah.
When you jump up to 32, that gives you a ton of RAM. If Windows is only using, let's say, 7, even stacking Chrome and PowerPoint and Excel and Word and I don't know, Adobe Suite and all these other different programs that you could be using, most people are not going to hit 32 gigs of RAM usage at one time. And if you do, you already know that. You know that that's an issue, and you know what you're shopping for at that point. So yes, it's important to get enough RAM, but don't get too worried about going out and overspending for a computer with 32 gigs. If you can upgrade it later, that's awesome. That'll probably keep life of the life of the computer around a lot longer. Excuse me, but just don't overspend on that. If it ends up being like a phenomenal deal and it's like a must grab and it comes with 32 gigs, awesome. Even if you don't use it, it is fine to just chill there and hang out until you do need it one day. But don't spend an extra $400 just because you remembered we said that RAM could be important when you're probably okay with 16.
Even 12. If you're
even 12.
Like if you're pairing it with the i3s that we talked about, 12. Like
that's also a good point to bring up too real quick about RAM. There are different generations, just like there are different generations of processors. We are kind of in the middle of a switchover from DDR4 to DDR5. That's all that number on the end means. It just means the generation count. Faster RAM and tighter timinged RAM, and like there's a bunch of like nerdy specifications we could get into there. For the most part, newer generations are going to be better. They're going to be faster, it's going to be more responsive, and sometimes that can make up for having a little less RAM to begin with. Just make sure you're not buying something with DDR3 at this point. If you're in 2024 and it says DDR3, run away. But really, I think moving forward now, if you want your computer to last you the full 5 to 7 years that we expect to see out of a laptop, you're going to probably need DDR5, unfortunately. So that's another good point to bring up there. As we move into our next category, which is storage. Storage is a weird one. Storage is kind of an unknown. It's going to be based on how you use a computer and what you need from it.
Which it sounds like that applies to every other step to this.
Yeah.
But this is probably the most convoluted of them.
Yes.
Because someone can have a relatively powerful computer, but only use it for one software that drains those resources. So they don't need a lot of storage,
Yeah, files, in a business setting, you could have files hosted on a server that you don't actually need the storage space on the device. You could have things hosted in the cloud. A lot of, for instance, that Adobe Suite that I referenced earlier, a lot of that stuff is actually cloud saved, and you're, editing the file off of that. You don't actually need to save it to the computer if you're using something like OneDrive or Google Drive or even iCloud. Hey, everything that we're talking about, it does apply to Apple computers as well. You could be using a backup solution like that, and you don't even necessarily know that the files actually aren't on your computer. We do a lot of work where we'll transfer files, for our clients' computers, and they go, "Hey, where is everything?" We're like, "Yeah, no, that's all it had." Turns out they had like 80 gigs in their OneDrive.
Yeah,
and
they needed
didn't even
to
realize
sync with it. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't even realize it wasn't on the computer on the device itself. So there are a couple different like milestones that you can hit as far as storage capacity is concerned. The lowest that I kind of see now is 256 gigabytes. If you're shopping for a Windows computer, Windows is going to take roughly 100 gigs of that. And that's not even counting future updates. So you're only going to be left with like 156. And now that's a really rough estimate. I could get into like an actual nitty-gritty estimation there, but that does not leave you a lot. I would, unless you know that all of your stuff is going to be saved off of the device, or you're okay with buying a bunch of external drives, or you're
if
going
you plan to upgrade it, yeah.
If you plan to upgrade later, stay away from 256. That's just not a lot. It doesn't leave you any wiggle room. Then the other two main categories are going to be 500 or 512. It depends on how the company rates their drives. Those are basically the same thing.
Yeah, if you're looking at the price range, it'll be the same, or sometimes you'll see 512 just labeled as 500.
Yeah.
So
that one is going to be, I think, that Goldilocks sweet spot for most people. That gives you plenty of room to save lots of files on the computer, photos, videos, all that great kind of stuff, but keeps you from overspending. Then you have a terabyte, which is basically, the math isn't quite 100% on this, but it's about 1,000 gigabytes. So we're talking twice the size of the 500 gig drives. And that is going to be, hey, I'm a little tiny bit of a digital hoarder. I like to have all my files. I like to keep them on me. Or I deal with very large files. If you're a photographer or something like that, you can get some very large image files if they're still like raw, unedited, uncompressed, and any sort of videography as well. You can start filling up drives very quickly. Also, we reference gaming a little bit. We're not going too much into the details of gaming laptops. That's just not our focus here today, but games will fill up a laptop very quickly. Yeah. Single games can be well over 100 gigs, if not even approaching 200 at this point, depending on the title. So 1 terabyte, hey, look, I like to keep all my stuff on me. I like to have basically a suitcase for a laptop here. I want to make sure I'm ready to go, Wi-Fi or no Wi-Fi, which also brings up a good point with laptops is most of the time you're going to be using Wi-Fi on a laptop. A lot of modern ones don't even come with an actual Ethernet jack to hardwire into the internet. So if that is a problem for you, might want to look at maybe getting a little bit of a larger drive as well. But again, the good news here is storage. Usually, unless you're Apple, it's usually replaceable. It's usually upgradable. In fact, in some laptops, it's even expandable, where you don't even have to touch the original drive. This is not what I would make my make or break point. If I saw a really, really good deal on a laptop, but I was like, man, I really wish it had a terabyte. Kind of don't worry about it. Most of the time, the price difference to go from a 500 to a terabyte is actually a lot more than it costs to just go out and buy a terabyte drive and switch it out. You can come to us and do that. Yeah. We'll do it for you. Or your other, local computer repair shop if you're not watching anywhere near our area.
If you're across the country, maybe don't.
Yeah, maybe don't. That'll be expensive. Shipping is outrageous right now. But don't make it the make or break point. But definitely something to keep in mind when you're price shopping. And if it happens to be $20 more for a terabyte, everything else is the same. Might be worth those $20.
Yeah.
That's going to bring us into kind of our final selection, our final conversation piece here, which is going to be screen type. Now, this is only a There's only an issue because of a recent addition kind of to the lineup of screen types. For the most part, for the last 10 years, laptop screens have been about the same.
Yep.
It's used the same technology. Yes, there are better ones, there's clearer ones, higher resolution, better frame rate. But really, you didn't have a lot of choice there. Your main choice was going to be, was it matte finish or glossy finish? I'm rocking a matte finish right now. What do you have over there? Oh, you got the
yeah,
gloss.
I think I've got a good bit of a gloss.
So the user preference there usually would be, hey, are you going to use this in a highlighting condition often? And I've even seen people have arguments about this. I like the matte finish more if I'm going to have glare.
Yeah.
I think it like disperses it better. But I've also seen people that say that they like the gloss more because it kind of does bounce off of the screen a little bit better and they can at least see through it in a way. That used to be the conversation up until about 2, maybe 3 years ago when we started seeing OLED monitors coming out in laptops. Also known as OLED, kind of depends on how you want to say that there. Now, the only reason I bring this up, typically OLED displays are going to be a little bit brighter. They're going to have better color differential. So your brights are going to appear brighter to the eye. Your darks and your shadows are going to appear richer and more.
That ratio from white
deep,
to dark.
Yeah, that more great deep color tone there. That all sounds like great and fantastic. They also tend to be a little bit better on battery life, although that's like negligible. But here's the one kicker to that. I think in most cases they're completely fine, but we do need to put out a disclaimer that they are susceptible to something known as burn-in. And if you're familiar with old
CRT
TVs, the tube style projection, they used to, if you didn't have a screensaver on your computer and you left it on the same screen for a couple hours on end, you would actually get a faint ghosting of that image onto the screen. Now, OLED is susceptible to the same thing. So if you're constantly doing things on the computer and the screen's moving all of the time, you're probably going to be completely fine. You'll never have to worry about it. But if you are somebody that lives, breathes, and dies in Excel, and you're looking at the same grid for hours on end, maybe stay away from that for right now, until we kind of get over this kind of like adoption of somewhat newer technology. Now there are companies that have played around with something called pixel shifting and pixel cycling, and like they all come up with their own name for it to try and counteract this burn-in that can happen. Might be better just avoid it if you think that might be an issue. Otherwise, just make sure that you keep your screen time out at like 15, 20, even 30 minutes. It luckily does take a while for this to set in, so most people are going to be fine. But again, just keep that in mind. Full disclaimer there. I don't want anybody ending up with a laptop that they can barely use because it's just covered in ghosted images and outlines of something they were working on 3 months ago. That would be frustrating.
I mean, unless you're still working on it.
Look, if you line up your Excel sheet to the same line every single day, you might not even notice. But there is a ton of more things that you could like nitpick and go back and forth on with a laptop. Obviously, there's going to be some things that are subjective. Hey, is it made out of plastic or is it made out of an aluminum? How does the keyboard feel? Is the keyboard backlit? Like, those are some things to keep in mind. The good thing there is that a lot of those are going to just be user preference. There's no right or wrong answer because it's whatever you need, you want, and also what you can afford in some cases. Those extra features do cost money. The only thing that I will say as kind of a closing note here as we wrap this up, if you're looking for a disk drive to be built into the laptop, I have bad news for you. I don't know of any that have that functionality anymore.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. We get that call very often, and I'm not making fun of anybody in particular. It's something that comes up. You're probably gonna have to buy an external CD or DVD.
Luckily, those aren't
reader.
too much of a pain.
No,
anyways.
you're probably not gonna lug it around with
Nope.
you to the to get on a plane or to get on even any sort of public transit. But just keep that one in mind. I've been Zach.
And I'm still Matt.
Still Matt over here. Thank you for joining us again for the podcast. If you would like to see more of our beautiful faces, be sure to like and subscribe. We have some new ideas for content coming out soon, and we are trying to get on a regular schedule for this. We will see you next time.